Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Jaspreet Kaur and today we will study the module Concept of Power, Authority and Leadership from the paper Social and Cultural Anthropology. Let us go through the learning objectives of this module. The first is to understand the concept of authority and its development over age, to understand the concept of power and its development over age, to understand the concept of leadership and its development over age, and to understand the relationship between power, authority, and leadership. Now, a society as defined in Oxford Dictionary is the community of people living in a particular country or region and having shared customs, laws, and organizations. This framework of society is shaped in a pyramidal system wherein a particular person or fraction takes care the regularity affair of the society. On a broader scale, a country run by the president or prime minister is aggregate of different societies. So for the organization of society, there should be people with authority, power and leadership. Sociologically, authority and power are loosely differentiated and have been found to be overlapping. By definition, power can be understood as the capability of a person to do certain things, whereas authority is the power or right of a person to make decisions for an organization. However, a leader can have authority to exercise his powers or to demonstrate his authority. Authority and power. Max Weber, who was one of the eminent sociologists, defined power as the probability that one actor within a social relationship will be in a position to carry out his own will despite resistance, regardless of the basis on which this probability rests. Weber conferred in his works the concept of power is sociologically amorphous, brought into act by an individual under demanding circumstances. On the other hand, Max Weber defined authority as the probability that a command with a given content will be obeyed by a given group of persons. Power and authority can be differentiated on the basis of stature of individual. That is, association of power is related to personal features of an individual, whereas association of authority is to the social status of the individual. Power and authority can be exercised by an individual either in a positive or a negative way. Adolf Hitler can be looked upon as a tyrant ruler who implemented authority and power negatively, whereas Akbar the Great executed his power and authority in a positive way. Authority and power both are variable with milieu of the individual. A major has power and authority to command over a team of soldiers, however, not over the entire battalion. A colonel has authority and power to question a major, but the latter doesn't has. An individual can utilize his power and authority to manipulate people under his command to believe in his ideology. In a work group, it's the power of the manager to motivate his employee into doing something extra, but it's his authority to suspend anyone. Max Weber further terms authority as legitimate power. The fundamental characteristic of authority is domination and imposition of will by the man in power. The authority can only be exercised by an individual if he succeeds in motivating his people for submission to his commands. From here we can estimate the complexity in the concept of power and authority. These intricate overlapping domains of the concept of power and authority have rendered sociologists in debate over the years. From the works of Dahl, Weber and Dahrendorf, power can be categorized as a subset of authority. For example, as Dahl says that power is what A has on B, if A has authority over B to persuade B in doing what otherwise B won't do on his own. Now, Stephen Lukes has beautifully debated through different views on power and tries to bring forth the concept of power as a phenomenon depending on the thinking of man in power. J. A. Coleman derives from Lukes' understanding of power and quotes, "Power is one of those concepts which inevitably involves endless disputes about their proper uses on the part of users." He further takes reference from the Edward Childs traditions: "Wherever there is organization, there will be authority, and authority will become enmeshed in traditions." Michaels proposed that authority can be defined as the ability, inborn or attained, for exercising dominance over a set of people. As repeatedly mentioned, authority, Roberto Michaels also holds that, is a manifestation of power and is dependent on the obedience of the followers. Coleman presented the argument of Robert, who refers to authority as sanctional power, institutional power, and further argues against Michael's view and claims that authority is not a capacity or innate, it is a relational and exists even when it is not being explicitly exercised. Power and authority can be distinguished, as per Coleman, on the basis of moral of individual in command. He exemplifies a manager who would try to control people by interfering in the private lives of his subordinates, hence questioning the boundaries of what defines authority and power. Albeit the manager has authority over the defined assignments of his subordinates, however, when he trespasses into their lives, he delegitimizes the authority into power. So, strolling through this concept of power and authority, let me provide a sequential view on both of these. As per Dahl, the concept of power and authority is not naive, but has been discussed since the time of Plato and Aristotle. He further argues that since authority and power have synonyms in every language, so it can be said that the concept of both exists in every community. It has, however, only after Weber's works that a pattern or a systematic understanding of both concepts starts to begin. Now, Weber in 1947 categorized authority into three broad categories. Let us look at them one by one. The first is the legal authority. The legitimacy of this type of authority is dependent on the set of laws and rules written in a state and applied administratively and judicially. The example of it can be seen in the administrative offices. The persons who behold and regulate such authority are elected through legal procedures, and the authority is restricted to the stature of a person, and implementation of authority is in turn dependent on the hierarchical superiors. Government offices can be sought as the best example for the rational legal authority. The second is a traditional authority. As the word tradition speaks for itself, this type of authority is legitimized by its ever-existence in the society. It can be exemplified by the monarchy system. Now, people belonging to this type of authority enjoy their position as they have inherited it by birth. Nepotism usually gives rise to such authority, that is, a person favored by a king or a ruler can pass on the attributes to his kith and kin. And the last category is the charismatic authority. This is a class of authority wherein a leader has intrinsic quality of cowing people into following him. Historically, two perspectives can be seen in this category. One is the religious and the other is the political. Now, Jesus Christ, Moses, Moinuddin Chisti, Gautam Buddha and Rama displayed miracles which made people to believe in them. And politically, Adolf Hitler, M.K. Gandhi, and Martin Luther King, by virtue of their personal oration skills, made people to follow them. In either case, the followers submit themselves to their will. Now let us look into the types of power. Power, according to Max Weber, is the ability of an individual or an organization to accomplish objectives with or without the help of subordinates on the objectives. As Max Weber said in his book Society and Economy, by power is meant every opportunity or possibility existing within a social relationship which permits one to carry out one's own will even against resistance and regardless of the basis on which the opportunity rests. To dictate and emphasize on power and its source, three theories have been proposed, and these are the pluralist theory, the power elite theory, and the Marxist theory. Briefly, the pluralism dictates the distribution of power, whereas elitist and Marxist theory emphasizes on concentration or centralization of power. John French and Bertram Raven categorized power into five categories. Let us discuss these one by one. The first is the legitimate power. This type of power is related to stature of an individual. Now, people believe in him and think of him as an ultimate authority to make any kind of decisions. An example of this kind of power is the sergeant in field, the prime minister, the chief executive officer of a firm, and etc. The second is the reward power. It can be somewhat sociologically related, analogously to behavioral training. Here, an individual has power to reward the work. This can be either financial, acknowledging, and recognition of the subordinates. The third in the category is the expert power, type of submission to the skills of superior. This class of power is attained by individual on the basis of his expertise in the field. For example, a new research scholar bestows a scientist with such power because he submits to the experience and expertise of the scientist in the field. Likewise, in a hospital, young doctors submit to the decisions of senior specialists. The project leader may be able to exercise expert power either as a subject matter expert in the content of the project or as an expert in the context of the project. The tools, practices, disciplines, and rigor of effective project management. The fourth is the referent power. Now, unlike others, this type of power is more or less dependent on positive favoritism. Positive favoritism can be understood as the person is capable of influencing his friends, relatives, neighbors, and other members of the society and earn their loyalty. These motivations can be achieved by showing affection, admiration, people-friendly behavior, and discussing ideology rather than imposing it. Referent power can be rooted from one person liking, respecting, and or seeking approval from another and connecting with that person. An example can be celebrities who have referent power by which they influence and have earned respect come loyalty from the people. The last is the coercive power. As it is explicit by the term coercive, this type of power is achieved by force. Generally, it has been reported in history as negative in nature. A leader or king forces people into submitting to his will and thinking. The person in power can punish or penalize the follower for not admitting his ideology or not fulfilling assignments that are assigned to him. The famous examples can be of Adolf Hitler and Napoleon. However, it is not always negative in nature, but for example, in case of national emergency, a leader can utilize force to deal with the situation. And similarly, in a corporate office, a manager might pressurize his subordinates to achieve company goals. French and Raven, by their classification, revolutionized the concept of power and structured the organizational studies. In other terms, we can say that the pluralistic view of Max Weber has dominated the concept of authority by his tripartite classification. French and Raven formalized the concept of power. An argument raised by Zambrano and Lukes on concept of authority furthers the theory of Max Weber's view on authority. They add that authority is dependent on the relation between superiors and the superiors and further defined that a multiple perspective aspects need to be considered for better understanding of the concept of authority. Richard Friedman identified a zone of comfort between ruler and the follower. That is, he states that a better impact of authority is achieved when the follower and the ruler have common interest. Ophelia Eglin et al. Recollect the four-factor theory of Peabody: legitimacy arising from a legally established order of rights and duties, position linked to the office a person occupies with its associated powers, competence resting on an individual's experience, skills, and knowledge of a domain, and a person based on individual philosophy and style of working. They suggest that the latter is correlated to leadership. Now, another key factor that has been linked to the effective leadership is decision making. Decision making is the intrinsic attribute of the individual which depends on skills, knowledge, and expertise of that individual. Decision making and implementation are constrained by the power of a person and his authority. Now, this brings us to understanding and studying of the term of the concept of leadership. Now, in layman's term, leadership can be defined as the ability of a person to lead a faction of people or an organization or a country. It is a process by the man in power influences people subjected to him and ordains them to accomplish objectives cohesively. Effective leadership is proportional to the expertise, skills, and decision-making traits of a leader. Bass, Evolio, Eckwell, and Conger have debated on the paradigm of leadership. They proposed that an effective leadership should be more of participative and democratic. Anderson and King support this view and put forth a very crucial skill for effective leadership, that is, clarity in the mission and objectives. An effective leadership can be best achieved by participating in discussions about any mission with the followers. Leadership was the form of social behavior known to humans for ages, and however, the literature regarding same is very recent. The growing literature in leadership has collected research studies from versatile domains to give a leader arsenal of factors to study for an effective leadership. As goes the famous saying, leaders aren't born, but it's a process of self-studying, analysis of surroundings, education, willpower, and desire that makes a leader. One of the critical traits of a leader is capability of making decisions. Decision-making is an outcome of the ethical and moral training of that leader. Rest, Thoma, and Narvaez discussed development of morals in relation to the cognitive training strategy. The decision-making dependence on cognitive training can be emphasized as follows. A person who has read history should always remember the consequence of a particular strategy or what he himself suffered upon making a plan. This experienced adduction is a trait of effective leadership as is brought into account by Bartlett in 1932. Salter, Green, Ree, Carmody-Burb, and Duncan very finely described that the moral grounds of a person and decision-making capability can be considered as a factor in looking at a leader as effective or ineffective. However, there has been lack of consensus among sociologists regarding how to define an effective leadership. Some authors suggest that leadership articles, since contain a vast domain of traits to be an effective leader, should be studied in parts, while others suggest that leadership is virtually developed by analytically practicing the traits individually. Philip Levins, Pascal Van Geet, and Paul Coetzee have brought forth that an effective leadership brings transformation into an organization. Burns in 1978 categorized leadership into transactional and transformational leadership. Conger and Kanungo and Conant and Levis furthered the idea of Burns and stressed on the outcome of leadership is dependent of the ruler-follower bond. A leader is to bring a transformation in the organization, has to identify the goals of the organization and the mentality of his followers. Philip Levines, Pascal Vance, and Paul Coetzee have based their article on the works of Bass, who has himself stressed on the bond between the leader and the follower. Bass in 1985 modified and propagated the ideology of Burns on leadership. He believed that transformational and transactional leaderships are different concepts, and he further briefed the qualities and behaviors that result into transformational or transactional leadership. Transactional leadership is based on leader-follower relationship, which in turn is directly related to the ways of trading the support and effort. Transactional leadership can be looked upon as a contractual form of leadership, wherein the main motives or the goals are taken into consideration that would promise a healthy relation with the follower for a particular duration of time. Now, Bass acknowledged that transactional leadership can be categorized into contingent reward leadership and management by exception. Contingent reward leadership is the type of leadership in which leader follower relation is rooted by the fear and reward strategy. And a leader can give promotions to the followers or punish them or reward them. Another class of transactional leadership involves transaction between the leader and follower in terms of intervention when there is lack of trust between the two. And this type of leadership is then called management by exception. Bass and Evolio in later years further categorized management by exception on the basis of timing of intervention by the leader, that is, active and passive management by exception. Bass, Evolio, and Haters defined active management by exception. The leader foresees the mistakes or anticipates them before they could lead, make the relation vulnerable. However, in passive management by exception, a leader intervenes when standards are not addressed as per the demands. The final type of leadership is laissez-faire leadership, which is inactive leadership, and in such type of leadership, there is avoidance or absence of any leadership. Now, in such a scenarios, leaders avoid making decisions, falter in taking actions, and generally are not present when required. The second category of leadership classified by Burns is transformational leadership, wherein the leaders take steps beyond expectations and enable the followers to perform even better. The Bass acknowledged four traits of the transformational leadership, and which were the charisma, the individual consideration, inspirational motivation, and intellectual stimulation. Charismatic factor of a leader makes people believe in him and its capability of a leader to whatever level he can take the followers. Individual consideration is the extent to which a leader is capable of addressing the grievances of the people, either individually or a group of people, and guide them till the problem is solved. In inspirational motivation can be described as the skills of the leader to inspire and to motivate people to achieve their goals, for example, by giving motivational speeches. And intellectual stimulation is a character of a leader to stimulate people into better thinking and to create better ways or ideas of facing issues. So, what are the qualities of effective leadership? These include like emotional stability, dominance, enthusiasm, conscientiousness, social boldness, tough mindedness, self assurance, decision making, and compulsiveness. So, after addressing the concepts of leadership, power, and authority, the next important thing is to understand the relation between these three and how these three are intertwined. Now, a leader who has capability of making decision would be effective if he has authority to implement it and power to motivate people into following it. Even though, as we said previously, that leadership can be good or bad, either ways the principal domain remains the same. For example, one of the world's most prominent and successful leader, Nelson Mandela, who was elected as the first president of Republic of South Africa, led anti-apartheid movement. By his clarity of mission, self-motivation, persistence, individual consideration, inspirational motivation, decision-making skills, emotional integrity, and other traits, he was able to lead the entire country to an equal and independent nation. He built trust in people by his moral values and inspired them by his speeches and motivated them to stick together, following his command and addressing grievances of people until he was able to create a nation. The primary goal behind effective leadership is the progression of organization as a whole. Mintzberg divided the organizational development motives into three sets of leadership focus, that is, the information, people, and action. Examples of each can be seen in every form of leadership. In corporate world, for example, where leadership is segregated at different levels, that is, the team leader, project manager, CEO, etc., the variance in leadership is also visualized. To understand this, we take into consideration a corporate sector where a leader may be interested in the information, generally focuses on communication, and spend most of his time in gathering information about other participants, stakeholders. In the second category, where people are the main focus of the leader, a leader tries to form better links with the employee and connects with them in all possible ways. Finally, leader who focus on action fundamentally believes in action. That is, they resolve crisis, they supervise action and devise strategies vibrantly. In religious perspective, a typical example of charismatic authority as a leadership trait was the great figures like Jesus Christ or Mainuddin Chishti displayed miracles or sermons that would render people's mind and heart into believing the leader and submitting to every commandment given. They had that eloquence in speech that would drive people to stick to their authority and power and motivate the followers to stick to a particular path. In such leaders, we can find transformational type of leadership accompanied by a healthy leader-follower bond. V. K. Kessler, in article on leadership and power, suggests that leadership cannot be implemented by an individual without power. Ophelia Eglin, Sharon S. Dawes, and Carrie A. Schinder have presented the role of authority in public sectors that leads to effective leadership. Gabriel Robin has debated religiously the role of power in leadership, stressing on the charismatic authority built power for effective leadership. Cantor proposed that powerful leaders depend on personal power than on job title or credential and instill confidence among their subordinates. He presents a dialogue on the inspirational motivational leadership and ability of a leader to harness out of his followers. Bloch said has furthered the concept by adding the fact that for effective leadership, a leader has to increase his power by nurturing the power of subordinates. The most effective leaders found in history had one common characteristic, that is, they would choose a few followers and bestow them with a part of his power and authority. And as a result, those people were accountable for their authority and power given to the leader. Harold et al. Stresses that for effective leadership relies on the leader to increase to their personal power, persuasiveness, and expertise. Further, they suggest that effectiveness of leadership is directly proportional to the communicating with followers and understanding their needs and wants. They suggest using rewards, expert and referent power to earn trust and faith of their followers. Stewart advised leaders for maximum effectiveness learn to use power effectively, be accessible to followers, enhance networking, listen to people, and appreciate public skills. Harold et al. Have further pointed at the development of personal power and authority power for the effective leadership. It can also be noted that the triangle of power, authority, and leadership gives rise to another factor that has been termed as influence. Influence of a leader by virtue of power and authority can be either positive or negative. This effectiveness of leadership can be related to the influence that a leader is able to create on the basis of his skills, utilization of power, and authority. Margaret and Albert Wiswell debate the dependence of leadership on power and authority, as they suggest that the body of research on the influence processes of leadership has focused on organizations with clear hierarchical lines of power and authority between boss, subordinate, and peer. Now, the leadership, authority, and power is like a three-gear system, that is intrinsic system, which makes each other spin, as you can see in the diagram. And there's a self-explicit table from the article by R. Dennis Green on leadership as a function of power. So students, let us summarize this module. From all the presented review of literature and research articles, it can be concluded that the concept of power, authority, and leadership has been practiced in every society, community, and organization. However, the research on the concept of all three is very recent. Max Weber is considered to lay roots on concept of authority and leadership, and whereas John French and Bertram Raven have laid the foundations on understanding the source of power for leadership. It can be concluded that power, authority, and leadership are intertwined to each other, and a leader can be an influence on the followers only if he has an authority and power. Thank you.